When you look at Africa today, you see a lot of civil society organizations, women's groups, lawyers associations, human rights organizations, ordinary citizens organizing themselves in citizen organizations that can impact the lives of other citizens, and that can also have influence in the governance process. Before 1990, that was not the case, because in a lot of countries there was not enough political space for civil society to emerge. In the one-party days, every organization, including labor unions, were affiliated with the sole party or the state party, and so there wasn't enough room for civil society to emerge. Those of you who are in the academic arena will remember that when Alexis de Tocqueville, the French philosopher, wrote about American democracy, one of the tenets that he really valued the most was citizens' engagement in the political process. And he thought that was one of the underpinnings of the success of American democracy. And on a continent where that was so lacking, it's encouraging, it's very heartening to see that when you look back 20 years ago and see how much has been accomplished by civil society in African countries, there is reason for hope. In some countries of failed states, I remember the peak of the crisis in the Democratic Republic of Congo, when the government had failed and was no longer functioning. A lot of the services that were being provided to ordinary citizens were being provided by church groups, civic organizations, women organizations, and so civil society on the continent now is more vibrant than was the case before. You can look at the media. The media in Africa today is pluralistic. In every country, there's an effort to create space for private media and independent media to emerge. Of course, there's still a lot of work to be done, but compared to the time when the government controlled all of the media, where there was only one voice, which was the official voice, there is more room and more space today for media organizations to be effective on the African continent. Fortunately, we've also had the evolution of technology that has created new opportunities with internet and blogging, and opportunities for ordinary citizens to be able to make their voices heard. We also have the thorny issue of elections. We always say, and I'm sure most of you would agree, that elections do not a democracy make. But elections are an important tenet of the democratic process. And a government that doesn't organize good elections will scarcely cater to other issues pertaining to governance. Elections are the one public contract that a government negotiates with its citizens in public view, and where the citizens get to make their pronouncements or judgments on the efficiency or lack thereof of their leaders. If elections are poorly conducted, then every other dimension of governance really pales in comparison. If a government steals an election, then locking up 3 or 4 journalists doesn't really mean anything to that government. Violating the human rights of its citizens doesn't really mean anything. Taking kickbacks on public services or contracts doesn't mean anything, because it's even done behind closed doors. So elections, while they do not a democracy make, are an important tenet of democratic governance. And what we've seen in the last few years is a case where in a number of African countries, good elections have been held, and governments have actually changed hands through the electoral process. I can talk about the case of Ghana, which we experienced in December of last year. I can talk about Botswana, Benin, Mali, South Africa, Malawi, Zambia, an increasing number of African countries where good elections are being conducted and where political power is actually changing hands, and sometimes from one political party to the other through the ballot process, and that also is very heartening. One area where Africa has also accomplished some significant result is in the area of women's participation in politics. Those of you who have studied Africa and have lived there or are from the continent recognize that in certain parts of the continent, traditional norms make it very difficult for women to emerge in the political arena. And even in the one-party days, where decisions were made by a close number of people behind closed doors, there was no attention to women's political participation. But increasingly today, women are having more voice. In a lot of countries, they haven't yet attained the level that we all would have wished. But you can look at the African continent today and say, for example, that in Rwanda, a country that is recovering from genocide and conflict, that women constitute the highest percentage of elected representatives in any parliament in the world. That is an accomplishment. You can look at Liberia, a country that also went through terrible conflict, and see that Liberia today is being run by a woman, the first woman to be elected head of state on the African continent. That is a watershed moment. And my hope is that as these elected women take on more responsibility and begin to prove their worth, that more women will be encouraged to get involved in the political process, and more Africans would feel compelled to give voice to these women leaders. And so when you look at the track record of Africa today and you look at the ratings of Freedom House, which is a credible organization, Freedom House now rates 11 African countries as being completely free and functioning democracies, and 19 others as being partly free, which makes a total of 30 countries compared to the 4 countries that we had in 1990.